doesn't look like running at first. That's the part that makes it hard to catch, because you're still showing up. You're still going to work, replying to texts, laughing at the right moments, keeping things moving. From the outside, nothing about your life screams avoidance, but there's this quiet pattern underneath everything. You don't sit with things for very long. The second something starts to feel too real, too heavy, too close to something you don't want to look at, you reach for something. Your phone, music, another conversation, another plan, another distraction that keeps you just far enough away from yourself to not have to deal with what's actually there. And you tell yourself it's normal. Everyone distracts themselves. Everyone stays busy. Everyone needs an escape sometimes. That's true. But there's a difference between taking a break from your thoughts and structuring your entire life around not having to face them. If you're honest, you can probably feel it, those small moments where everything goes quiet. You're alone. No noise, no conversation, no movement. And for a second, something starts to come up. Not fully, not clearly, just enough to feel it. A thought you've been avoiding, a feeling you've been pushing down, a version of yourself you don't really want to sit with. And right there, before it fully forms, you interrupt it. You grab your phone, you open something, you go do something, anything but let it land. You don't even think about it anymore. It's automatic, like your mind knows exactly how to pull you out of yourself before you get too close. At some point, you probably told yourself you'd deal with it later, whatever it is. The way that situation actually made you feel, the way that person treated you, the version of yourself you don't fully respect right now, the things you regret, the things you wish you handled differently. You pushed it off because you didn't have the energy or the time or the right moment, and that made sense at the time. But later has a way of turning into never when you get good enough at avoiding it. The problem is the things you avoid don't go away. They just change how they show up. They turn into overthinking at night when everything finally slows down. They turn into random mood shifts you can't explain. They turn into this low-level tension you carry even when nothing is technically wrong. You start reacting to things harder than you should. Small things feel bigger. Normal situations feel heavier. You feel off, but you can't fully explain why. Because you're not dealing with what's happening now, you're carrying everything you didn't deal with before. And if you really look at it, some of what you're avoiding isn't even other people. It's you. It's the version of you that stayed too long. The version of you that ignored what was obvious. The version of you that kept choosing something that wasn't choosing you back. It's uncomfortable to sit with that, because it's easier to be mad at them than it is to ask yourself why you accepted it. It's easier to say they hurt me than to sit with I kept letting it happen. Not in a blaming way, just in an honest way. That's where most people turn away. Right there. Because once you start asking those questions, you can't hide behind the situation anymore. You have to look at your patterns, you have to look at the choices you made, you have to look at the parts of yourself that contributed to the outcome. Not because you deserved what happened, but because you allowed things to continue longer than they should have. And that's a harder conversation to have. So you avoid it, you stay busy, you move on quickly, you tell yourself you're over it. But you're not over it. You just never actually processed it. Running from yourself feels like progress for a while. Because you're moving, you're doing things, you're not sitting in pain. It feels productive, it feels like you're getting past it, until you realize you keep ending up in the same place, same type of situations, same type of people, same feelings, just wearing different faces. And at some point you have to ask yourself, is it really all just bad luck, or is there something here I haven't faced yet? Sitting with yourself is uncomfortable. There's no way around that, because when you stop running, everything you've been avoiding doesn't come back gently. It comes back all at once, the thoughts, the realizations, the clarity you didn't want yet. You start connecting things. You start seeing patterns. You start realizing that some of the pain you've been carrying isn't just about what happened. It's about what you didn't say, didn't do, didn't walk away from when you should have. But here's the part people don't say enough. That discomfort, that's where things actually start changing. Not when you distract yourself, not when you move on quickly, not when you convince yourself you're fine. When you actually sit there and let it be what it is. No filter, no distraction, no immediate fix. Just you being honest with yourself. You don't need to have some breakthrough moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Most of the time it's quieter than that. It's just catching yourself in the moment where you would have avoided something and choosing not to. It's letting the thought finish, letting the feeling stay a little longer instead of shutting it down immediately. It's admitting something to yourself without trying to soften it. I stayed longer than I should have. I ignored things I knew were wrong. I kept choosing something that wasn't good for me. Not to beat yourself up, just to stop pretending it didn't happen. Because once you stop running, you start understanding, and once you understand, you stop repeating. That's the shift. Not perfection, not becoming someone completely different overnight. Just becoming someone who sees things clearly enough to make different choices next time. You don't need to be harder on yourself. If anything, you probably need to be more honest with yourself. There's a difference. Being hard on yourself keeps you stuck in guilt. Being honest with yourself moves you forward. The version of you you've been avoiding isn't your enemy. It's just the part of you that knows the truth. The part that saw everything as it was. The part that's been trying to get your attention in those quiet moments you keep interrupting. You don't have to fix everything right now, but at some point you do have to stop running. Because no matter how far you go, no matter how busy you keep yourself, no matter how many distractions you stack on top of each other, you're still there. And until you're willing to sit with that, nothing really changes. So next time it gets quiet, don't reach for something right away. Just sit there for a second, let whatever comes up, come up. You don't have to like it, you don't have to solve it, just don't run from it. Not this time. I want to ask you something, and I need you to actually sit with it before you answer. Not the surface answer. Not the answer you give when someone asks how things are going, and you say, good, yeah, we're good, because it's easier than explaining the thing you can't fully explain yet. Not the answer that protects them. Not the answer that protects you from having to admit something uncomfortable. The real one. Do they deserve you? And I already know what some of you are doing right now. You're softening it. You're reframing it. You're saying, well, it's not about deserving. Relationships aren't a transaction. Nobody's keeping score. And that's true technically. Love isn't a ledger. I'm not asking you to add up points. But I think we use that logic, it's not about deserving logic, to avoid asking a question that would give us an answer we're not ready for. We call it maturity. We call it seeing the full picture. We call it not being naive about how love works. Sometimes it's just avoidance with better vocabulary. So I'm asking again, slower this time. Do they deserve you? Let me tell you what I think deserving actually looks like in practice. Because I don't think it's about being perfect. I don't think it's about never messing up or never going through something that makes you hard to be around for a while. Everyone goes through something. Everyone has seasons where they're not their best self. That's not what I'm asking about. I'm asking about the baseline, the default, the way they treat you when nothing is wrong, when there's no crisis, when it's just a regular Tuesday, and you're both just existing in each other's orbit. Do they pay attention to you? Not in a surveillance way, in a you matter to me way. Do they notice when you're off before you have to say you're off? Do they ask follow-up questions about the things you mentioned last week, or does everything you say kind of evaporate the moment the conversation ends? Do they show up not just for the big stuff like the emergencies, the celebrations, the things where showing up is easy because the stakes are obvious? The small stuff, the random Tuesday stuff, the I was thinking about you for no reason and wanted you to know stuff. Do they make you feel like being with you is something they actively want or something they're passively okay with? There's a difference. And you know the difference. You feel it every time they reach for you versus every time you're the one reaching. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. Most of us who end up in the wrong relationships, but in relationships where the love is real, but the care is uneven, where the connection is genuine, but the effort is lopsided. We don't end up there because we're stupid. We end up there because we're hopeful, because we're good at seeing potential, because we genuinely believe in people, and we're willing to stick around while they figure themselves out. That's a beautiful quality. I mean that with no sarcasm. But it also means we spend a lot of time loving people for who they could be instead of paying full attention to who they currently are. We're always working slightly ahead of reality, already in the version of this that exists 6 months from now, when they've grown into the person we see in them, when the relationship has settled into what we know it can be. And while we're living in that future version, the present version keeps not showing up, keeps texting back late, keeps going quiet at the exact moments we need them loud, keeps making us feel like we're asking for too much when we asked for the minimum, keeps doing just enough to keep us from leaving, but not enough to make us feel chosen. And we stay, because we can see it. We can see what this is building toward. We can see who they're becoming, except, and this is the part that's hard to say, they're not building toward anything. They're just here, right now, exactly this. And the version you keep waiting for is a fiction you wrote to make the present one livable. That's not love. Or, it is love, it's completely love. What you're feeling is absolutely real, but it's love aimed at a projection, and projections can't hold you when you need to be held. I want to talk about the stories we tell ourselves, because I think this is where most of the damage actually happens, not in the relationship itself, but in the narration we build around it. You notice something, a pattern, the way they consistently make plans and then half cancel. The way they're always a little more present right after you pull back, then go quiet again once you come back. The way they talk about the future in vague terms that never quite include you specifically. The way you always feel a little bit like you're auditioning. You notice it, and then immediately, without even thinking about it, you explain it. They're just going through something right now. They're not great at communication, that's just how they are with everyone. They had a bad experience before you, and they need time to trust. They're stressed, they're distracted, they're working on it. And look, some of those things might be true. People do go through things. People are sometimes bad at communication. People do carry wounds from before you that take time to work through. But here's the question you're not asking. Why is it always your job to account for all of that? Why are you the one doing the interpretive work? Why are you the one translating their behavior into the most generous possible version so that you can keep feeling okay about being here? Why are you working so hard to make their absence make sense while they're not working at all to show up? You're writing them a story they didn't earn, and you're doing it because the alternative, believing what you're actually seeing, is a loss you're not ready to hold yet. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from this, and I want to name it because I don't think we talk about it enough. It's not the exhaustion of doing too much, it's the exhaustion of hoping too long. Because hope takes energy, real, physical energy. Every time you pick up your phone and feel that small drop when it's not them. Every time you replay a conversation trying to figure out if it meant what you wanted it to mean. Every time you prepare yourself for a version of them that doesn't quite materialize. Every time you choose to stay open when everything in you is starting to close. That's work. Invisible, unacknowledged, completely unsustainable work. And the worst part is you can't really explain it to anyone. Because from the outside, everything looks fine. You're together. You're okay. Nothing catastrophic has happened. There's nothing to point to. It's just this quiet, constant, low-grade drain. Like a light you left on in a room you're not using. It doesn't seem like much, but eventually it runs something down. I want to be honest about something that I think gets glossed over in conversations like this. Sometimes the person doesn't deserve you not because they're a bad person, but because they're a good person who is not built for what you need. And that is somehow harder. Way harder. Because if they were awful, you could leave and feel justified. If they were unkind or cruel or checked out completely, the decision would make sense to everyone, including you. But they're not awful. They're actually pretty good. They care about you in their way. They have real qualities that you love. They've been there for you in real moments. The history is real. The warmth is real. They're just not enough. For you, specifically. For the way you love and the way you need to be loved. And that's a loss that doesn't fit neatly into any category. You can't be angry about it. You can't even fully grieve it because nothing technically died. It just quietly wasn't what you needed. And the longer you stay, the more you reshape yourself to fit into something that was never quite your size. Deserving isn't only about behavior. It's about fit. It's about whether this person, as they actually are right now, is capable of giving you what you actually need. Not theoretically, not eventually. Now. And if the honest answer is no, even if you love them, even if they love you, even if it's real, that no matters. Let me ask you something else. When you imagine your life 5 years from now, the version you actually want, not the version you've been negotiating yourself down to, are they in it? Not as a project, not as someone you're still patiently developing, as a person, as who they are right now exactly as they are, flaws and growth edge and current limitations and all. Do you want that, or do you want the idea of them completed? Because there's a version of staying that is really just an extended negotiation with reality, where you're not in the relationship you have, that you're in the relationship you're waiting for. And that waiting can go on for a long time if you let it. Long enough that you forget you were waiting. Long enough that it starts to feel like this is just what love is. It's not. Love is not a holding pattern. Love, real, actual, mutual, present tense love, feels like landing, like arriving somewhere, like the effort you're putting in is going somewhere and being met and building something. If it doesn't feel like that, if it feels more like effort into a void and hope into a silence, then I think you have your answer to the original question. They don't deserve you not because they're terrible, but because deserving you means being present for you, means meeting you somewhere close to where you're standing, means caring enough to try in ways that are visible and consistent and real. And they're not doing that. Not enough, not yet, maybe not ever. Now here's the part where I have to be honest about the other side of this. Because this isn't a clean story with a clean villain. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the reason we end up with people who don't quite show up for us is because we make it too easy for them not to. We pick up the slack so seamlessly that they never feel the gap. We cover for their absence so naturally that they don't even register there's been an absence to cover for. We're so consistent, so giving, so reliably there, that they get used to being the one who receives. Not out of malice, Not even out of selfishness exactly, just gravity. Things moved toward the path of least resistance, and we made the path very smooth. And this is the part that's hard to sit with, because it's not about blame. You didn't do anything wrong by loving generously. That is not a flaw. But it might have accidentally taught someone that they didn't need to match you, that you'd still be there, that the relationship would hold regardless of their investment level. You trained them, sort of, without meaning to, rewarded their passivity with your presence, showed them that the minimum was enough to keep you. So when I ask, do they deserve you, I also want to ask, have you ever actually shown them what it looks like when they don't? Have you ever let the gap show instead of immediately filling it? Have you ever said, out loud clearly without softening it, I need more than this, and if I don't get it, I will leave? Not as a threat, as a truth, as information, because some people don't know what they have until they're actually close to losing it. Not in a game-playing way, for real. Sometimes love needs to feel the gravity of its own loss before it learns to hold on. You've been doing all the holding. You haven't let them feel what it would mean to let go. Some people step up when that becomes real, some people don't. But either way, you need to find out, because the alternative is spending the rest of this relationship being the only one who's truly in it. And you deserve better than a love that only stays because you never gave it a reason to try. I keep thinking about this image, someone standing at a door knocking. Not desperately, not frantically, just steadily, patiently, because they genuinely believe that eventually the door will open. And the door opens sometimes, just enough light comes through that it feels like it's working, that the knocking is doing something, that they'll be let all the way in soon. And they keep knocking. I think a lot of us are that person. We've been knocking for so long that we've forgotten what we're actually asking for. We've gotten so used to the half-open door that we've stopped imagining what a fully open one would feel like. But you weren't meant to live in a doorway. You were meant to be let in. And somewhere out there, I believe this, I really do, somewhere there is a door that opens when it hears you coming, before you even knock. A person who doesn't need you to convince them, who doesn't require you to earn your place, who sees you clearly and wants exactly that. That person won't make you wonder. They won't make you wait. They won't make you build a story around their absence to make it survivable. They'll just be there, steadily, visibly, consistently there. I want to say one more thing before we get to the end of this, and it's the part I think people need to hear the most, even though it's the part most people are least ready for. You are allowed to leave something that isn't working, even if it isn't catastrophic. I think we've collectively decided that you need a really good reason to end something. Like there has to be a defining incident, a betrayal, a pattern of cruelty, something that would hold up in court almost, something you could explain to anyone and have them nod and say, yeah, that makes sense, I get why you left. And if you don't have that, if it's just a slow drain, just a quiet mismatch, just the feeling of being slightly smaller than yourself for a very long time, then leaving feels selfish, dramatic, like you're giving up on something you should have stayed for. That is not true. Feeling consistently unseen by someone who claims to love you is a reason. Carrying the emotional weight of a relationship mostly alone is a reason. Reshaping yourself over and over to fit into something that was never quite built for you is a reason. Waking up next to someone and feeling lonely is a reason. You do not need their behavior to be unforgivable in order for your unhappiness to be valid. You do not need to wait for a catastrophe to justify protecting yourself. Sometimes the quiet reasons are the realest ones, the ones nobody else can fully see, the ones that live in the small daily accumulation of not quite enough. Those reasons are allowed to be enough. You are allowed to choose yourself. Not because they're terrible, not because the love isn't real, just because you know when you're honest that this isn't the shape of a life you want to keep living. That is a complete and legitimate reason to go. So, do they deserve you? You don't have to answer me, but I think you should answer yourself. Quietly, honestly, without the softening and the generous interpretations and the future version you keep projecting onto them. Just the truth of it. Just what you actually know underneath all the hoping. Because here is what I know about you. The version of you that loves this hard, that stays this long, that gives this much even when it's not coming back equally. That version of you deserves something that matches it. Not perfect. Not without difficulty or friction or the occasional season where things are hard. Just matched. Genuinely, effortfully show up even on Tuesdays. matched. You have been so patient. You have been so generous. You have given so much of yourself to something that keeps asking for more without asking how you are. I think you know the answer to the question. I think you've known for a while. The only thing left is deciding what you're going to do with it. I used to believe that people stayed. I really did. I believed that the ones you let in, the ones you trusted, the ones you loved, they would always be there. That some bonds were unbreakable. That some people were permanent fixtures in your life. But life has a way of showing you the truth. It starts small, a friend who doesn't reply for weeks, a partner who drifts away without explanation, a sibling who moves on with their own life and forgets the moments you thought mattered. I remember the first time I felt it for real. I called someone I trusted, someone I thought would answer no matter what. And there was nothing. Just the ringing, the silence, the empty void where connection used to be. And in that silence, it hit me. People leave. Not always because they want to, not always because they mean to, but sometimes just because life moves on without them. I kept trying to hold on. I tried texting, calling, making plans, being available. I gave more than I should have, sacrificed comfort, and ignored red flags. I wanted them to stay. I wanted the certainty of their presence in my life, but they didn't. And every time someone left, I asked myself the same question. Was it me? Was I not enough? Was I too much? Was I too quiet, too loud, too complicated, too simple? I overanalyzed everything, replayed every conversation, every laugh, every glance, trying to find the moment they decided to leave. And slowly that questioning becomes a pattern. You start expecting departure before it even happens. You brace for absence before it touches you. You begin to withdraw, to protect yourself from the inevitable pain. Because the truth is, the people you love, the ones you open your heart to, they don't always stay. And the weight of that realization hits harder than the loss itself. I stayed loyal, I stayed caring, I stayed present. And yet, one by one, they left. And every time it happened, I felt smaller, less certain, less safe, less myself. I began to notice the pattern. I saw the fleeting nature of human attention, of human connection. I realized that attachment doesn't guarantee permanence, that love, effort, and devotion don't always secure someone's presence. And the hardest part, the leaving isn't always dramatic, it isn't always loud or angry. Most of the time it's quiet, invisible, a slow fade until you're left staring at the empty space they used to fill. And in that silence, the doubt creeps in. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm unlovable. Maybe everyone leaves because I'm not enough. I want you to understand this part because it's the moment that defines everything that comes after. The moment you see that no matter how much you give, no matter how much you care, some people just leave. And it leaves a hole, a hollow ache that isn't just missing someone. It's missing the certainty that someone was supposed to stay. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just them leaving, it was me too. Not that I caused it, not that I pushed them away intentionally, but I realized I had been carrying people the way you carry fragile glass, careful, hopeful, afraid to let go. I gave everything I had, my time, my trust, my heart, without measuring if it was returned. And when they left, I felt betrayed. But the betrayal wasn't entirely theirs. Part of it was mine. Part of it was believing permanence was guaranteed, believing that love alone could anchor someone who wasn't ready to stay. I started noticing patterns, the friends who left when I needed them most, the people who only stayed when life was convenient, the ones I chased, overanalyzed, overexplained myself to. It wasn't that I wasn't lovable. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It was that I was giving to people who weren't prepared to meet me where I stood. I had built my sense of security around others' presence instead of my own. I let my happiness hinge on messages that may never come, on plans that may never be kept, on people who could leave without warning. And in doing so, I allowed absence to feel like failure. I began to question why I kept myself open to that pain. Why did I care more than they did? Why did I stay longer than they could? Why did I invest my energy in people who didn't match it? And slowly, painfully, I understood. It wasn't about them leaving. It was about me learning, about recognizing my patterns of overgiving, of chasing, of hoping for something that was never fully mine, about understanding that my heart was generous, yes, but it needed boundaries, that care and devotion are valuable, but only when matched. I realized I had been mistaking attachment for love, persistence for connection, hope for reality, and that realization cut deep, Because the truth is, attachment without reciprocity isn't love. It's longing, and longing without response is a weight no one should carry forever. I began to see how my fears of abandonment, of not being enough, had shaped every interaction. I stayed longer than I should have. I gave more than I needed. I pretended that absence didn't hurt. And the more I did, the more I trained myself to accept the inevitable. Everyone leaves in the end. But the key wasn't to stop caring. The key wasn't to build walls so high no one could reach me. The key was to notice the pattern, to understand my own role in it, to reclaim the power I had been giving away. It wasn't easy. Recognition always hurts. Self-reflection always burns. But understanding the why behind the pain was the first step toward freedom. And in that understanding, I began to glimpse something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Possibility. Not for them, not for the ones who left, but for me. Possibility that I could show up differently. Possibility that I could care without losing myself. Possibility that love didn't have to end with leaving. I started changing the way I showed up. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. I stopped over-explaining myself. I stopped chasing texts, calls, or attention that wasn't freely given. I stopped bending over backward to prove my worth. Instead of hoping people would stay, I watched how they treated me. I matched energy instead of giving more than I received. I let the ones who weren't consistent drift away without argument, without guilt, and for the first time in a long time, it felt calm. I learned the power of boundaries, real ones, not just the ones I whispered to myself at night. Boundaries that said, I will not stay in a space where I am not wanted. I will not beg for care. I will not diminish myself to keep someone around. Boundaries that felt like armor, but also like freedom. I realized something important. Leaving isn't always their choice. Sometimes it's a reflection of their own lives, their own struggles. Sometimes they leave because they can't stay. And that's not my failure. That's not a reflection of my worth. I started to internalize it. My love didn't have to be reciprocated to be valid. My care didn't have to be rewarded to matter. And the truth was, I was allowed to step back, to protect my heart, to save myself from the endless cycle of longing and loss. I practiced observing instead of reacting. I observed patterns. I observed moments where I felt drained, unnoticed, unappreciated. I observed my own feelings without judgment, and each time I reminded myself, I am enough. My presence matters. My energy is valuable. It wasn't about becoming cold or bitter. It was about becoming steady, calm, certain, about knowing my worth even when others didn't, about understanding that someone leaving didn't erase what I had to give. It just meant I had to give it to someone ready to receive it. And in that steadiness, something shifted. The panic I used to feel when someone didn't reply immediately started to fade. The ache I felt when plans fell through became manageable. I didn't stop caring. I didn't stop loving. I stopped sacrificing myself for the illusion of permanence. It was a quiet power, the kind that doesn't scream or demand. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. But it was mine. And for the first time, I felt anchored not by someone else's presence, but by my own. I began to see life differently. People would leave. It was inevitable. But I didn't have to leave myself behind with them. I could show up fully, openly, honestly, and still walk away when it wasn't returned. I could value my heart enough to protect it, even when it hurt to do so. And that hurt. It was different now. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't panic. It was acknowledgement. It was understanding. It was a lesson, a refining fire, a guide for how to move forward without losing myself. And then one day I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping anymore. I wasn't measuring my worth against who stayed or who left. I was standing firmly in my own life, in my own heart, and it was enough. I still feel the ache of absence sometimes, but it doesn't define me. I don't need people to validate my presence. I don't need anyone to choose me to feel whole. I've learned that care is powerful, but self-respect is stronger. That love is generous, but boundaries protect the soul. I began showing up differently. I still care, yes, but selectively. I still give, yes, but intentionally. I still open my heart, yes, but to those who are ready to meet me there. And every time someone leaves, it no longer shatters me. It informs me. It reminds me of the patterns I no longer repeat. I stopped chasing ghosts. I stopped hoping for consistency from those who had none to give. I stopped believing that permanence was guaranteed, and in that clarity I found freedom. Freedom to grieve without guilt. Freedom to love without fear. Freedom to exist without needing permission. The truth is, everyone leaves in the end. But that doesn't mean I am left behind. It doesn't mean my love is wasted. It doesn't mean my heart is broken beyond repair. It means I am human. It means I am learning. It means I am growing. And in that growth, I found something stronger than attachment. Myself. I walk through life knowing that people may come, people may go. And that's okay. Because I am steady. Because I am whole. Because I am not defined by who chooses to stay, but by how fiercely I choose to honor my own heart. And that changes everything. I stayed. I grew. I am ready now. Heartbreak is killing you not the way you think. When most people hear that phrase, they picture the dramatic version. The person who can't get out of bed, who stops eating or eats everything, who cries in the shower and calls their friends at 2 a.m. and makes decisions they'll regret, and generally falls apart in visible, identifiable ways that other people can recognize as heartbreak and respond to accordingly. Maybe that was you for a while. Maybe that phase happened and it was real and it was allowed to be real. But that's not the version I'm talking about. The version I'm talking about is quieter, more functional. The heartbreak that has integrated itself so completely into your daily life that it no longer looks like heartbreak from the outside. You're going to work, you're showing up to things, you're laughing when things are funny and responding to texts and doing all the external indicators of someone who is fine. And something is wrong, has been wrong for a while, in a way that you can feel in the quality of your days and the specific flatness that settles over things that should feel like more, in the part of you that is present everywhere and fully arrived nowhere. That's the heartbreak I'm talking about. The kind that doesn't announce itself anymore. The kind that has become the weather of your inner life rather than a storm passing through it. And it is killing you, slowly, in ways that matter. Let me start with what heartbreak actually is. Not the emotion, the experience, because I think we've collapsed it into something too simple, and in doing so, we've made it harder to understand what it actually does to a person. Heartbreak is not just sadness about a person, it's the dismantling of a future. When you loved someone, really loved them in the way that causes heartbreak when it ends, you built something around them. Not just in the relationship itself, but in your internal architecture. The shape of your day started including them. The future you were imagining started featuring them. The part of your mind that plans and hopes and builds forward-looking pictures of what your life could be. That part drafted a version that had them in it. And when they left, or when it ended, or when whatever happened, you didn't just lose the person, you lost the future. The specific version of what was supposed to come next, the plans, the possibilities, the ordinary imagined life that was going to include them in ways big and small and completely mundane. That's a significant loss. It's actually several losses happening simultaneously. The person, the relationship, the future, and the version of yourself that existed inside all of that. The you who was going somewhere with someone. The you who was chosen. The you who had somewhere to aim all the love that is now just sitting in you with nowhere to go. And grief that large doesn't resolve on anyone's timeline. It doesn't resolve because you've been in enough pain for long enough. It doesn't resolve because you told yourself you should be over it by now. It resolves when it's been felt fully. And most people haven't felt it fully because feeling it fully is one of the more difficult things a person can do. Here's what happens to heartbreak that doesn't get fully processed. And this is the part that most people need to hear because most people have not processed it fully. It gets stored in the body and the nervous system, in the specific ways your system starts to operate after a significant loss that was never completely grieved. And it shows up in places you wouldn't immediately connect to the heartbreak, in the quality of your sleep, in the specific anxiety that arrives without an obvious cause, in the way you respond to new people, the guardedness, the waiting for the catch, the inability to fully relax into something good. It shows up in how you feel about yourself, because heartbreak, especially the kind that involved rejection or being left, carries a specific question embedded in it. A question that you probably haven't said out loud but have been living with since the moment it ended. Why wasn't I enough? Not as a conscious thought, as a background hum. A question your system keeps returning to in the quiet moments. Assembling evidence, building a case for an answer you're afraid of. And the answer it keeps landing on, the one the unprocessed heartbreak keeps delivering, is a verdict about your worth. That is not accurate, but that has been whispering to you in various forms ever since. That verdict changes how you move through the world, how you enter rooms, how you receive compliments, and whether you believe them, how much risk you're willing to take in the next relationship, how quickly you become convinced that something good is about to go wrong. The heartbreak installed something, and until it's properly processed, the installation keeps running. I want to talk about the physical reality of it, because I think we stay too much in the emotional and psychological description and miss how real the physical dimension is. Heartbreak is a physical experience, not metaphorically, neurologically, chemically, measurably physical. The brain processes social rejection and emotional loss through some of the same pathways it uses to process physical pain. This is not a figure of speech. Brain imaging studies show it. The reason heartbreak feels like something physical is because it partially is. And chronic unprocessed grief, the kind that doesn't move, that stays active in the system, has physical consequences. Your cortisol stays elevated, your immune function is suppressed, your sleep architecture is disturbed in ways that affect everything from cognitive function to emotional regulation. Your heart rate variability, which is a measure of how well your nervous system can adapt to changing conditions, decreases, which means your system is less flexible and more prone to stress responses. You're not just sad, your body is in a state of ongoing physiological stress. And if that state persists long enough, if the grief never moves, if the heartbreak never gets processed, if the system never gets to complete the cycle and return to baseline, the cumulative physical cost is real and measurable. The heartbreak is not just in your feelings, it's in your body and your body needs it to move. Here's the part that I think is hardest to say and most important to hear. Some of you are not heartbroken about a recent loss. You're heartbroken about something old, something that happened years ago maybe, that never got properly grieved. A relationship that ended in a way that left things unresolved. A person you lost, to death, to distance, to the quiet dying of something that used to be alive, but you've never fully mourned. Something from your early life even, that shaped your understanding of love and loss in ways you've been building on ever since. Without examining the foundation, old heartbreak is still heartbreak. Old grief is still grief. And the fact that it happened a long time ago doesn't mean your system has finished processing it. It means you've been carrying it for a long time without finishing with it. And that old heartbreak is in the room every time you enter a new relationship. It's the thing that makes you flinch at specific moments. The thing that produces responses in you that seem disproportionate to the current situation. The thing that makes you slightly more vulnerable to loss than you'd like to be and slightly more defended against closeness than serves you. You've been trying to build new things on a foundation that has an old crack in it, and the crack keeps affecting the structure. And you keep addressing the structure without addressing the crack. The old heartbreak needs to be grieved, however long ago it happened. However much you've been telling yourself you're over it, if it's still affecting how you operate, and it is, if you're honest, it hasn't been fully processed. That processing is available. It's just uncomfortable, and most of us choose the discomfort of carrying it over the discomfort of completing it. I want to talk about what the unprocessed heartbreak does to your next relationship, because I think this is where the most tangible damage shows up and where the most change is possible. You enter the next thing carrying everything from the last one, not consciously, not as a decision, just as the accumulated weight of what happened, the loss, the questions it raised, the verdict it whispered, the ways your system reorganized itself to protect you from a repeat. And the new person, who is not the old person, who has not done anything to deserve the suspicion they're about to receive, gets the version of you that was shaped by what came before. The guarded version. The one that's waiting for the familiar hurt. The one that pulls back right when things get close because close is where it happened last time. The one that interprets their behavior through the lens of the old story because the old story is still the most recent data your system has. And then the relationship develops, or doesn't, in the shadow of something it had nothing to do with. And you wonder why it feels hard, why connection that should be easy feels effortful, why you can't quite get to the ease you remember having before all of this happened. The answer is that you brought the heartbreak with you, and until you process it somewhere other than inside a new relationship, you'll keep bringing it with you, not because you're weak or broken or incapable, because that's just how unfinished things work. They follow you until they're finished. Let me name what grief that actually moves looks like, because I think people confuse grieving with staying in pain, and the confusion is part of what makes them avoid it. Staying in pain is circular. It revisits the same memories, asks the same questions, produces the same feelings. It doesn't move toward anything, it just hurts in the same place over and over. Grieving that moves is different. It faces the loss rather than living inside it. It asks not just what happened, but what it meant, what the relationship was, what it gave you, what it cost you, what it taught you about yourself and what you need. It allows the full feeling, not the managed portion, not the amount that feels survivable, the actual full weight of the loss. And it sits in that weight long enough for something to shift, and something always shifts when you let it. Not into okay, into different, into something that has moved, that has a different quality than the sharp, fresh thing it started as, that is becoming slowly and imperfectly something you carry differently. That's not the absence of grief, that's grief completing itself, and it's the only thing that actually ends the chapter rather than just marking time within it. I want to say something about getting help, not as a disclaimer, as a genuine thing worth considering. The kind of grief I'm describing, old, stored, affecting your physical health and your relationships and your sense of yourself, that kind of grief often needs a witness, a specific, trained professional witness. Not because you're broken, because grief this significant was not designed to be processed alone. We are social creatures. We heal in the presence of others. The things we've never said out loud to another person, the full account of what the loss was and what it cost, those things complete differently when they're finally spoken and received than when they continue to live only inside our own heads. Therapy is not a sign that you've failed to handle something. It's a sign that you're taking seriously something that is serious, that you're treating the grief with the respect it deserves rather than white-knuckling through it or suppressing it, or hoping it will eventually resolve without being addressed. Some people can do this work in other ways, through community, through practice, through relationships of genuine depth where the true account can be given and received. But if those things aren't available or haven't been sufficient, therapy is not a last resort. It's a reasonable first response to something significant. I want to talk about what heartbreak does to the way you see yourself in love, because I think this is the most lasting damage and the least discussed. Before the heartbreak, before whatever happened that broke something, you had a certain baseline assumption about yourself as someone who could be loved. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't unconditional, but it was there. A working faith that you were the kind of person someone could choose and keep choosing, that your love was something worth receiving, that the risk of caring deeply was on balance worth taking. The heartbreak hit that assumption directly in the specific place where you are most exposed. And you rebuilt. Of course you rebuilt. You're here. You kept going. But the rebuild happened on top of a foundation that cracked. And the crack is still there underneath everything you've built since, and the way you enter new relationships with slightly less certainty than you used to. In the way you receive love with slightly more suspicion. In the way something in you always holds a small reserve back, just in case, because the last time you gave everything you know what it cost. That reservation is understandable. It's even reasonable. But it's also the thing that prevents you from fully arriving in anything new. Because you're never completely there. There's always a part of you that's watching from a slight remove, monitoring for the familiar signs, ready to begin the protection sequence at the first indication that history is about to repeat. And that watchfulness is the heartbreak's most enduring legacy. Not the sadness, the way it changed your relationship to your own capacity to be loved. The quiet erosion of the assumption that you deserve the full thing. You do. That assumption needs to be rebuilt. Not by the next person who loves you, by you from the inside before they arrive. Here's what I want to say to you directly. The version of you who has been carrying this, you are allowed to be heartbroken. Even now, even if it happened longer ago than feels reasonable to still be affected by. Even if people in your life have moved on from understanding why you're not fully over it. Even if some part of you thinks you should be further along than this, the grief doesn't come with an expiration date. It comes with a completion point, and the completion point is not determined by a calendar. It's determined by whether you've actually been through the thing. And I want you to know that being through it, really through it, the full weight of it, the questions and the loss and the version of yourself that existed inside that relationship and had to be rebuilt from scratch when it ended, being through that is possible. Not in a way that erases it, in a way that lets you carry it differently, in a way where the wound becomes a scar rather than an open thing that is still bleeding in subtle ways into everything that comes after. That's what processing it produces. Not the absence of the experience, the completion of it. And you deserve that completion. You've been in the unfinished version for long enough. The heartbreak is killing you. Quietly, daily, in the ways that unfinished things always do damage. By staying active in your system, by coloring your perception, by making the next thing harder than it needed to be, by keeping a version of you frozen at the point of impact while the rest of you keeps moving forward. You don't have to keep living in the impact. The grief is real. The loss was real. What you felt was real and what you lost was real. None of that gets diminished by being willing to finally complete the processing of it, feel it fully, say the true account of it to someone who can receive it. Let the full weight of it land without immediately managing it down to something more bearable. And let it move. Because on the other side of the moving is the version of you that is not organized around the loss anymore. Not hardened, not closed, not pretending it didn't happen. Just through it, on the other side of it, in possession of yourself again in a way that the heartbreak has been preventing. That version of you is still available. It's been waiting for you to finish with this. Go finish with it. You've been in it long enough. It always hits me hardest when the world is quiet. During the day there's noise, people around me, work, texts, errands, responsibilities. There's a rhythm to life, a way to keep moving without thinking too much. But night doesn't let you hide. Night strips everything down to its raw edges. The first few nights after we broke up, I didn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my own breathing. And in that silence, every memory comes rushing back sharp and uninvited. The way she laughed, the way her hair caught the light, the little habits I used to love, the way we used to talk late into the night, the plans we made that will never happen. It's cruel how the world can be so normal around you when your heart is unraveling. People keep scrolling, keep texting, keep living, and you're there still holding pieces of someone who's gone. During the day, I can pretend. I can distract myself with music, with conversation, with work. I can laugh, I can make plans, I can convince myself I'm fine. But at night, all that pretense evaporates. Night doesn't let you lie to yourself. Night makes the absence louder than any noise, the longing sharper than any pain. And it's not just sadness, it's that hollow ache in your chest, the one that doesn't have words, the one that sits there quiet and steady, reminding you of everything you lost. And in that stillness, you start to question yourself. Did I love too much? Did I care too much? Was I not enough? Could I have done something differently? You replay the conversations, the good nights, the fights, the silences. You try to find the exact moment it all went wrong, the exact word, the exact choice. And no matter how much you search, it doesn't matter. Because sometimes it's not about what you did. It's not about what they did. It's just that some things aren't meant to last. And yet night doesn't care about meaning. Night just opens the wound wider, just reminds you that the one person you wanted to stay is no longer there. That's when it hit me. The nights weren't making me weaker. They were showing me what I hadn't been willing to face during the day. I started noticing patterns in the way I thought about her, the way I checked my phone hoping for a message that would never come, the way I replayed our last conversation, analyzing every pause, every word, every okay that felt heavier than it should, the way I imagined a different outcome, as if wishing hard enough could rewrite reality. I realized that part of the pain came from me giving her more than I gave myself. I cared so deeply that I lost track of my own needs. I bent over backward to match her energy, to prove my love, to anticipate her feelings. And now without her, that imbalance became painfully clear. My heart was trained to give, but not always to protect itself. I saw how I had been chasing consistency from someone who couldn't offer it. How I had built a world where her approval mattered more than my own peace. And suddenly, the nights made sense. They weren't just lonely, they were mirrors. Mirrors reflecting the patterns I had repeated for years. The ways I gave too much, the ways I stayed too long. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It wasn't that I didn't deserve love. It was that I loved someone who wasn't ready to stay. Someone whose absence left more than just silence. It left a gap where I had invested too much, too quickly, too fully. And in that reflection, there was also clarity. Pain was teaching me about my boundaries, about the difference between care and overcare, about the value of giving love to those who could meet me halfway, not just taking it for granted. Night became less of a punishment and more of a teacher. Each hour spent awake, each tear shed, each memory revisited was a lesson in self-awareness. I realized I couldn't force someone to stay. I couldn't bend my heart around their hesitations or their inability to commit. And as much as it hurt, understanding that was freeing. It was the first step toward protecting myself. The first step toward respecting my own heart as much as I had respected hers. The nights still hurt, but now they carried meaning. They weren't just reminders of loss, they were reminders of growth. Reminders that my love had been real, that my care had been deep, that my heart was capable of giving fully. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to learn how to give it to myself as well. The first nights I tried to change how I felt, I failed. I thought maybe I could trick my heart, distract my mind, or numb the ache with noise and movement. But grief isn't a problem you solve. It's a presence you sit with until it no longer controls you. So I started small. I stopped rereading old messages. I stopped imagining her next move, stopped hoping for signs, stopped reaching into the empty space she left behind. I deleted the photos I didn't need, muted the notifications I compulsively checked, and told myself the truth. She isn't coming back. Not the way I imagined, not the way I wanted. I began creating boundaries I had never known I deserved. Boundaries that weren't about anger or bitterness, but about self-respect. I stopped answering when I didn't want to. Stopped chasing conversations that led nowhere. Stopped over-explaining my feelings to someone who couldn't hold them. I started giving my attention only to the people and things that reflected care back to me. And with those boundaries came a subtle power shift. I wasn't consumed by her absence anymore. The night still whispered her name, still nudged memories into sharp focus, but I was no longer collapsing under them. I observed the pain, acknowledged it, let it move through me, and then returned to myself. I was no longer the person bending, waiting, and stretching my heart to fit someone else's inconsistency. I was steady. I was anchored. I replaced desperation with selectiveness. I matched energy instead of chasing it. I learned that showing care didn't require sacrificing my own peace. I realized that being alone at night didn't have to be punishment. It could be reflection, a time to breathe, a space to understand my own heart. The nights didn't stop being lonely immediately. They never do. But now, the silence was softer. It was a quiet room where I could hear myself think, where I could notice patterns, where I could prepare to love again, not someone else, but myself first. The ache became tempered by clarity. The longing became tempered by choice. I realized that part of healing isn't forgetting, isn't rushing, isn't trying to feel normal again. Healing is learning how to stay whole even when the world is quiet. Healing is sitting with the hurt until it teaches you what it means to protect your heart, to honor your needs, and to see that love isn't a game of endurance. It's a reflection of mutual care, and you deserve to experience it fully with someone willing to meet you there. Night was no longer a place where I broke. It was where I built myself back up. Eventually the nights became quieter, not because the memories disappeared, but because I stopped letting them control me. I no longer felt like a ghost wandering through someone else's absence. Instead, I learned to exist fully in my own presence. I started noticing the small ways I reclaimed myself. I laughed without guilt. I made plans without hesitation. I let friends in without fear of being too much. I learned to fill the quiet with my own voice, not the echo of someone else's. And slowly I began to recognize a simple truth. The pain didn't break me. It refined me. I understood now that loving someone who couldn't stay wasn't a failure. It wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of timing, of readiness, of circumstances beyond my control. I had loved deeply, and that capacity for love remained mine. My heart was intact. My integrity was intact. And the nights, once a reminder of what I lost, became a testament to what I had survived. I still remember the ache, the longing, the late hours where silence felt heavier than anything else. But now that ache sits beside strength, not despair. I carry the lessons instead of the bitterness. I honor the love I gave, but I no longer tether my happiness to someone else's choices. I walk away from the nights with my head held higher, with patience, with calm, and with the knowledge that my heart is valuable enough to wait for someone who chooses me fully. It hurts, and it will hurt for a while, but it won't break me. Pain didn't claim me. It taught me. It sharpened my awareness. It taught me boundaries. It taught me self-respect. And most of all, it taught me that being alone at night doesn't mean being unloved. It means I'm ready to love myself fiercely, completely, without compromise. The nights are still there. They always will be, but I am no longer afraid of them. I am no longer haunted by what could have been. I am here. I am whole. And when morning comes, I rise, not as someone broken, but as someone who has endured. Someone who has grown, someone who is ready for what is meant to be, rather than clinging to what never was. Pain didn't break me, it refined me, and now I am ready. I think the hardest part about something ending is realizing it was already ending while you were still trying to save it. When I look back now, I can see it clearly. The small pauses, the delayed replies, the way their voice changed just slightly. Not enough to call it out, but enough to feel it. But back then, I called it stress. I called it timing. I called it, we're just going through a phase. Because admitting it wasn't meant to last would have meant admitting I was holding on to something already slipping through my hands. It didn't start badly. That's the thing. It started with intensity, with late night conversations that made sleep feel optional, with inside jokes that felt sacred, with that rush of feeling chosen, like out of everyone in the world, they saw me. And when you feel seen like that, you don't question it. You don't prepare for it to end. You just lean in. I leaned in fully. I memorized their patterns, their favorite songs, the way they said my name when they were tired. I built a version of the future in my head without even realizing it. Not a marriage and forever. Nothing dramatic, just consistency, just comfort, just them, staying. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like I was the only one building. They still talked to me, still laughed, still said the right things. But something was missing. Effort. And when effort slowly disappears, you start replacing it with your own. I texted first more often. I asked deeper questions. I reassured them when they seemed distant. I made excuses for their silence. They're just busy. They're going through something. It's not about you. And maybe it wasn't. But that didn't change the feeling. The subtle loneliness of being connected to someone who is already detaching. I felt it before I admitted it. That quiet instinct that whispers, "This feels different now." But I ignored it because I didn't want to be dramatic. Because I didn't want to lose them. Because I thought love meant fighting harder when things got uncertain. What I didn't understand yet was that love isn't proven by how hard you fight alone. And sometimes something isn't falling apart because you didn't try enough. Sometimes it's falling apart because it was never meant to stay together. But I wasn't ready to accept that yet, so I stayed, and I tried, and I hoped, even when deep down a quiet part of me already knew this wasn't going to last. The realization didn't hit all at once. It wasn't some dramatic fight. No screaming, no slam doors, no final speech about how we want different things. It was quieter than that. It was in the space between texts. The way replies became shorter. The way conversations that used to flow for hours started feeling forced after 5 minutes. I remember staring at my phone one night, reading the same dry message over and over, trying to find hidden meaning in it. Maybe they were tired, maybe they didn't mean it that way, maybe I was overthinking. I was always the one overthinking. But overthinking only happens when something feels off, and something felt off. They didn't ask about my day the way they used to. They didn't notice small changes anymore. They didn't look at me the same. And when someone stops noticing you, that's when it starts ending. I tried to compensate. I became lighter, easier, less needy. I stopped bringing up things that bothered me. I told myself not to ruin the vibe. I convinced myself that if I could just be a little more patient, a little more understanding, a little less emotional, maybe it would go back to how it was. But here's the truth I didn't want to face. When something is fading, you can't love it back to life. You can't effort your way into someone's certainty. You can't compete with someone's indifference, and I started to feel tired. Not of them, but of carrying it. Carrying the conversations, carrying the reassurance, carrying the hope. It felt like holding water in my hands. The tighter I tried to grip it, the faster it slipped through my fingers. There was one moment I'll never forget. We were together, physically in the same space, but emotionally it felt like there was an ocean between us. They were talking, smiling, present, but not with me. And that's when it hit. You can feel alone even when someone is sitting right next to you. That kind of loneliness is different. It's heavy, because it forces you to admit something. You're fighting for something the other person already let go of. I went home that night with a quiet ache in my chest. Not heartbreak, not yet, just clarity trying to break through denial. I lay in bed replaying everything. The beginning, the excitement, the promises that weren't promises but felt like them. And for the first time, I allowed the thought to fully form. Maybe this isn't temporary. Maybe this isn't a phase. Maybe this is the end, just stretched out slowly so it doesn't look like one. And that's when the question changed. It stopped being, how do I fix this? And started becoming, why am I trying to save something that doesn't want to stay? That's a painful question, because once you ask it, you can't unsee the answer. And the answer was simple. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It wasn't that I didn't try hard enough. It wasn't that I failed. It was that this, whatever it was never meant to last. And deep down, I think we both knew it. I was just the only one still trying to pretend otherwise. Letting go didn't happen the day it ended. It happened in layers. First, I stopped arguing in my head. I stopped replaying conversations, trying to decode where it shifted. I stopped rewriting the past to make it feel fixable. Because once you see something clearly, you can't go back to pretending. I realized I wasn't actually scared of losing them. I was scared of losing the version of myself that believed this was finally it. The version of me that thought, maybe this time it'll stay. That's what I was grieving. Not just the person, but the hope. And hope is harder to bury than people. At first, I wanted answers, closure, a clean explanation I could hold in my hands. But the truth is, not everything ends with clarity. Some things fade because they were only meant to teach you something, not stay with you forever. And when I finally stopped fighting the ending, something strange happened. I felt lighter, still sad, still disappointed, but lighter. Because I wasn't dragging something behind me anymore. I wasn't trying to convince someone to see my value. I wasn't overextending myself to maintain something that was already collapsing. I started noticing how much of myself I had minimized to make it work. How often I swallowed words. How often I acted unbothered. How often I accepted less than I needed just to avoid losing them. And that realization hurt, because it meant I wasn't just losing them. I had been losing myself too. But here's the part that changed everything. I didn't hate them. I didn't turn cold. I didn't decide love was stupid. I didn't convince myself I'd never care again. I just understood. Some people come into your life not to stay, but to show you what you tolerate, to show you how deeply you can love, to show you where your boundaries should have been. And once the lesson is learned, the connection has no more purpose. That doesn't make it meaningless, it just makes it temporary. I stopped romanticizing what it could have been. I stopped imagining alternate endings. I stopped wishing they would wake up one day and suddenly become the version I needed. Because if someone has to transform completely to love you properly, they were never aligned with you to begin with. Letting go wasn't loud, it was quiet. It was choosing not to text, not to check their social media, not to ask mutual friends how they were doing. It was choosing peace over curiosity. And slowly I started feeling like myself again. The version of me that didn't revolve around someone else's attention. The version of me that felt steady without external reassurance. The version of me that understood. If it was meant to last, it wouldn't have required me to shrink. And that's when the bitterness disappeared. Because I wasn't rejected. I was redirected. It wasn't taken from me. It was removed. And there's a difference. I used to think every ending meant failure. Like if something didn't last, it must not have been real. Or I must not have tried hard enough, or maybe I just wasn't enough to make someone stay. But now I see it differently. Some things are real even if they're temporary. Some connections are intense because they were never designed for longevity. They burn bright, they feel significant, they teach you something, and then they end. Not because you ruined them, not because they were fake, but because they fulfilled their purpose. It was never meant to last. And that doesn't make it a waste, it made it a chapter. I stopped asking, why didn't it work? And started asking, what did it teach me? It taught me how quickly I attach when I feel understood. It taught me how deeply I love when I feel chosen. It taught me how easily I ignore my intuition when I'm afraid to lose someone. But it also taught me something else. I don't want half effort. I don't want uncertainty disguised as mystery. I don't want potential. I want consistency. I want something that doesn't require me to question it every night. Something that doesn't feel like I'm constantly auditioning for reassurance. Something that doesn't slowly drain me while I call it love. And if that means some things end early, good. Because I'd rather something end than stay in a space where it was quietly deteriorating. I no longer romanticize what we could have been. Because what we could have been would have required them to become someone else. And love shouldn't require transformation to feel secure. It should feel aligned. Now when I look back, I don't feel anger. I feel gratitude. Gratitude that it didn't drag on longer than it needed to. Gratitude that it showed me my patterns. Gratitude that it forced me to raise my standards instead of lowering them further. The ending wasn't a punishment, it was protection. And maybe the most powerful realization of all is this. If it was meant to last, it would have required effort from both sides. It would have felt steady. It would have grown naturally instead of being forced. Love that's meant for you doesn't make you anxious. It doesn't make you question your worth. It doesn't slowly fade while you're fighting to keep it alive. It stays. And if it doesn't stay, let it go. Because not everything that feels intense is meant to be permanent. Some people are lessons, some are mirrors, some are reminders, and some are simply experiences that prepare you for something deeper. It was never meant to last. And now, I'm finally okay with that. Not because it didn't matter, but because I matter more. I used to believe that some people were meant to be in your life forever. That once you found someone who felt like home, someone who made the world quiet and the chaos manageable, you'd never have to let them go. She was that person. Every laugh, every small touch, every moment we shared felt like proof that this was different, that this was real, that maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of love people write songs about. But the truth is, I stayed too long. I held on too tightly. I gave her all the parts of me I thought would make her stay, and somehow it wasn't enough. She started drifting, slowly, quietly. At first, it was easy to ignore. A missed call here, a delayed reply there. I told myself it was work, stress, life getting in the way. I rationalized everything. I convinced myself that if I just waited, if I just gave her space, everything would go back to the way it was. But space doesn't fix distance when someone doesn't want to bridge it. And then the signs became impossible to ignore. The way her energy shifted when I was around. The way her eyes no longer lingered. The way her voice sounded polite instead of soft. Like she was here, but not really. And that's when the doubt started. The questions that eat at you late at night. Was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? Did I miss a sign, a word, a glance that could have made her stay? I kept replaying every moment, every conversation, every laugh, trying to find the turning point, trying to figure out when exactly the person I thought I knew stopped feeling the same way. And slowly, painfully, I realized something that broke me in pieces. Love isn't always enough, even when you care more, even when you give more. Even when your heart is wide open, it's not a guarantee that the other person will choose you the way you choose them. I lost her, the girl of my dreams, the one I imagined a future with, the one who made everything feel possible. She's gone, and the worst part, she didn't leave with anger. She didn't leave with a fight. She left quietly, slowly, like the space between us stretched so wide that neither of us could cross it anymore. Now I sit with the emptiness. The ache of missing someone who no longer wants to be missed, the heaviness of realizing that some dreams don't last, and I have to ask myself the hardest question of all. How do I move on when she was everything I thought I wanted? That's when it hit me. It wasn't just that she left. It was that I had been holding on to a version of her that never truly existed. I realized I had been clinging to hope instead of reality, clinging to the idea of her, the idea of us, rather than seeing who she really was and how things truly were between us. I had given her my everything without ever stopping to ask if it was being received the way I imagined. I overanalyzed every text, every laugh, every small moment, trying to find meaning where maybe there wasn't any. And in the process, I lost myself a little. I saw patterns I had ignored because they were uncomfortable to face. The late replies, the canceled plans, the enthusiasm that faded when I needed it most, the way she only showed up when it was convenient for her. I had made excuses for her. I had rationalized it, told myself, maybe she's busy, maybe she's stressed, maybe she doesn't know how to say what she feels. But deep down, I knew the truth. She wasn't choosing me, and that's when the self-reflection got real. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It wasn't that I loved too hard or too fast. It was that I was loving someone who wasn't ready, someone who couldn't meet me where I stood. I kept asking myself, why do I care so much about someone who doesn't care the same way? And the answer wasn't simple. I cared because I allowed myself to care. I cared because I invested my heart where it wasn't being nurtured. I cared because I believed in the what could be instead of the what is. I had been overgiving, overthinking, overhoping, and in the process I had allowed my happiness to hinge on someone else's choices. That was the real pattern, the dangerous one, the one that left me feeling empty, desperate, and questioning my worth. The realization was painful, but it was also freeing. It wasn't about blaming her, it wasn't about resenting her for leaving. It was about understanding how I got here, about seeing the ways I had let hope blind me to reality, about recognizing the parts of myself I needed to protect moving forward. It wasn't easy to admit, but I had to face it. I had to stop chasing someone who wasn't chasing me. I had to stop convincing myself that patience and loyalty could force love. I had to accept that sometimes, no matter how much you give, it just isn't enough. When you finally see the patterns, the truth isn't cruel. It's clear. And clarity is the first step toward moving on. The first step toward moving on wasn't forgetting her. It wasn't pretending I didn't care. It wasn't erasing the memories or the way my chest tightened every time her name appeared on my phone. The first step was deciding that I deserved clarity, respect, and reciprocity. I began setting boundaries, small ones at first. I stopped checking my phone obsessively. I stopped reading into her every word, every pause, every tiny signal. I stopped waiting for messages that might never come. I stopped hoping for a version of her that only existed in my mind. And in that space, this quiet, deliberate space, I started to notice something powerful. I could breathe again. I didn't need her validation to feel alive. I didn't need her attention to feel worthy. I didn't need her affection to prove my capacity to love. I began redirecting the energy I had spent on her, on analyzing, on rationalizing, on hoping, back into myself. I invested in the parts of me I had neglected. I did things that made me feel strong, whole, and alive again. I stopped over-explaining my feelings to her. I stopped justifying my worth to someone who had already made their choice. I stopped tolerating the moments of half-love, the silences that burned, the inconsistency that hurt. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to feel power returning to me. I observed my emotions instead of letting them control me. I matched energy where it existed, and I let go where it didn't. I realized that choosing myself didn't make me cold or bitter. It made me steady, grounded, and in control. I didn't turn my back on love. I turned my back on waiting for someone who couldn't meet me. I didn't stop caring. I stopped investing where care wasn't returned. I didn't stop hoping. I started hoping for something mutual, for a love that didn't feel like a battle of patience and perseverance. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm inside my own skin. I felt safe with my own heart. I felt like the person I had been before all the waiting, all the chasing, all the questioning. And that calm, that quiet strength was revolutionary, because it showed me that I didn't need her to be complete, that I didn't need her to feel whole, that I could hold my own heart and protect it without shame or guilt. I started seeing my past love not as a failure, but as preparation, as a lesson in what I would and wouldn't accept, as a reminder that my heart is powerful, but it deserves reciprocity, not half measures. The more I honored my boundaries, the more I recognized my worth. The more I invested in myself, the less I ached for what wasn't mine to hold. And in that space, I started feeling free. Eventually, the ache softened. Not because I forgot her, not because I stopped caring, but because I stopped letting her absence define me. I realized that moving on wasn't about erasing what we had. It wasn't about pretending the late nights, the small laughs, the moments I thought would last forever never happened. It was about carrying them differently, without letting them weigh me down, without letting them keep me from living. I started living for me, not in a loud, dramatic way, not to prove anything to anyone. I lived for the quiet moments where I could feel myself again, the mornings where I woke up without the heaviness of waiting, the evenings where I went to bed proud of how I spent my day instead of consumed by what could have been. And in that space, I discovered something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I wasn't bitter, I wasn't angry, I wasn't trapped in what I had lost. I was steady, I was clear, I was open to life again. I realized the truth. Love isn't about holding on to someone who doesn't choose you. Love is about knowing your worth, protecting your heart, and being willing to step away when it isn't returned fully. Some people stay in your life forever, some leave quietly like she did. And that's okay. It doesn't diminish what you felt. It doesn't make your heart smaller or weaker, it makes you human. I learned to honor the love I gave her by giving that same love to myself. I stopped chasing what wasn't meant for me and started chasing clarity, joy, and connection that was mutual. I began to trust that the right people would meet me where I stood, fully, consistently, willingly. And so I moved on, not with resentment, not with regret, but with quiet confidence. I moved on knowing that the girl of my dreams wasn't lost. She simply wasn't the one for me. And that was enough, because the truth is, letting go isn't giving up. It's making space for something real, something that doesn't require hope to fill in the gaps, something that chooses you as fully as you choose it. And now I'm ready. Pain didn't break me. It refined me. Loss didn't define me. It prepared me. And moving on isn't the end. It's the beginning. I stayed, I learned, I grew, and now I'm alive again. Why doesn't she love me? I met her on a Tuesday. Nothing special about the day. No rain. No music playing in the background. No movie moment. Just a random Tuesday. She sat 2 seats in front of me in class, laughing with her friend about something I couldn't hear, but I remember thinking one thing. I want to know what makes her laugh like that. The first time we talked was stupid. I dropped my pen. She picked it up before I could. "Here," she said, smiling. 3 seconds. That's how long the conversation lasted. But for some reason, I thought about it the rest of the day. Weeks passed. Eventually, we started talking more. At first, it was small things, homework, classes, teachers we both hated. Then it became normal we'd sit next to each other, walk out of class together, send random messages late at night. And somewhere along the way, I started noticing things. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way she laughed at her own jokes. The way she said my name. That's when it happened. I liked her. Everyone around me knew it before I admitted it. My friends would say things like, "Bro, you're down bad." I'd laugh it off. But they were right. Because suddenly everything I did started revolving around her. I'd check my phone hoping she texted. I'd replay conversations in my head. I'd think about what she meant when she said something, over and over again. One night we were texting. It was past midnight. The conversation slowed down until it turned into one of those deep talks people only have when they're tired. She told me about her fears, about how she overthinks everything, about how she's scared of getting hurt. And I remember staring at my screen thinking, how could anyone hurt someone like her? Then she sent a message. "Thanks for always being there." That sentence felt like winning the lottery. Months passed like that. Same routine, talking, laughing, late night conversations, but something was missing. Something obvious. She never flirted, never hinted, never gave me the signals everyone talks about, but she also never left. So I convinced myself it meant something. One day my friend asked me a question. "Have you told her you like her yet?" I laughed. "No." "Why not?" I didn't have an answer. The truth, I was scared, not of rejection, but of losing what we already had. Then one afternoon, everything changed. We were sitting outside after class. The sun was going down. People were walking past us. She was telling me about some guy in her class. "Yeah, he's really nice." She said something about the way she said it felt different. I tried to play it cool. "Oh yeah?" She smiled. "I think he likes me." My chest tightened. "So, do you like him?" She paused, then she nodded. "Maybe." I remember smiling. I remember saying something like, "That's cool." I remember acting normal. But inside my head, one thought kept repeating, "Why isn't it me?" That night I stared at my phone. Her contact was at the top of my messages. All I had to do was type 3 words. "I like you." But my fingers wouldn't move, because suddenly I realized something. If I sent that message, everything could change. A week later, she told me they were going on a date. She seemed excited, happy, and I tried to be supportive. "Hope it goes well," I said. She smiled. "Thanks." That night I walked home alone. The same question kept replaying in my head, over and over again. Why doesn't she love me? I was there for her. I listened to her problems. I cared about her. So why him? It took me a long time to understand something. Love isn't a reward. It's not something you earn by being the nicest person. You can't calculate it like a math equation. Care plus time plus loyalty not equal to love. Sometimes people just don't feel the same way. Months later, we stopped talking as much. Not because we fought, just because life moves on. Different classes, different schedules, different people. But every once in a while, I still think about her laugh on that random Tuesday. And if you're watching this right now, maybe you're asking the same question I once did. Why doesn't she love me? And the answer might be something you don't want to hear. Sometimes there isn't a reason. But one day you'll meet someone who looks at you the way you once looked at her. And when that happens, you won't have to ask the question anymore. Because the right person won't make you wonder. They'll make it obvious. You know what the worst part is? It's not the rejection. It's the almost. Because when someone rejects you clearly, it hurts. But at least it makes sense. They say no. You move on. But when someone almost loves you, that's a different type of pain, because you start replaying everything, every conversation, every laugh, every moment you thought meant something, and you start asking yourself questions that never have real answers. Did I say something wrong? Was I not good enough? Did I wait too long? After she started dating that guy, things between us didn't stop immediately. That's what made it worse. We still talked sometimes, still laughed, still had those random conversations that used to make my day. But something had changed, and we both knew it. There was this invisible line between us now. Before, it felt like we were walking towards something. Now it felt like we were standing still, and she was slowly walking away. One night she texted me again. "Can I vent for a second?" Of course she could. She always could. So I stayed up listening to her talk about problems with her boyfriend, how he didn't understand her, how he didn't listen the way I did, how he wasn't as patient as I was, and the entire time I just sat there thinking one thing: then why aren't you with me? But I didn't say that. Instead, I said the same thing I always said: "I'm here for you." And she replied with the same message she always sent: "You're such a good friend." That sentence. You're such a good friend. People say it like it's a compliment. But when you love someone, that sentence feels like a door closing, because suddenly you realize something. You weren't the guy she loved. You were the guy she felt safe with. The guy she vented to. The guy who listened. The guy who stayed. But safety doesn't always create attraction. And that realization messes with your head, because you start thinking, maybe I should have been different. Maybe I should have flirted more. Maybe I should have been less available. Maybe I should have acted like I didn't care. And that's when something dangerous starts happening. You begin to question the way you are as a person. You start thinking kindness is weakness. You start thinking loyalty is stupidity. You start thinking caring too much is the reason you got hurt. So slowly, you start changing. You stop texting first. You stop opening up. You stop showing people the parts of you that once cared deeply. Because somewhere in your mind, you're trying to protect yourself. I remember the exact moment I noticed that change. She sent me a message one afternoon. Something funny, a meme we both would have laughed at months earlier. I looked at it, and for the first time, I didn't feel anything. Not excitement, not happiness, just nothing. And that scared me more than the heartbreak ever did. Because heartbreak means you cared, but feeling nothing, that means something inside you shut down. That night I stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that happened. And for the first time I asked a different question. Not, why doesn't she love me? But why did I give so much of myself to someone who never asked for it? That realization hits hard. Because the truth is, she never promised me anything. She never said she loved me. She never said we were going to end up together. Those were expectations I built in my own head. And when those expectations broke, I blamed her. But deep down, I knew something. I wasn't just sad about losing her. I was sad about losing the version of me that believed things would work out. The version of me that believed if you cared enough, if you tried hard enough, if you stayed long enough, eventually someone would choose you. But life doesn't work like that. And realizing that changes you quietly, slowly, but permanently. But because after that, you start guarding your heart differently. Not because you want to, but because you remember exactly how it felt when someone almost loved you, and almost can mess someone up for a long time. And the craziest part, even after all that, there were still nights where I caught myself wondering the same thing, just staring at the ceiling, asking a question I already knew the answer to. Why doesn't she love me? You know what nobody tells you about heartbreak? It doesn't end the day you realize the truth. That moment where everything finally clicks, where you accept she isn't choosing you, where you tell yourself you're done thinking about her. That's not the ending. That's just the beginning of the quiet part. Because after that realization, life keeps moving, but your mind doesn't move as fast. You still catch yourself checking your phone sometimes, not because you expect a message, but because your brain spent so long hoping for one that the habit never fully disappears. You'll hear a song that reminds you of her, or pass a place you both used to talk about, or see something random that you know she would have laughed at, and for half a second, your mind goes straight to her, before you even realize it. It's strange how people can leave your life, but pieces of them stay behind in your routine, in your memories, in the way you think. At first you hate that. You want to forget everything. Every late night conversation, every inside joke, every moment you thought meant something, because remembering feels like reopening a wound that's trying to close. But memories don't disappear just because you want them to. They fade slowly, and that takes time. During that time, you start noticing something about yourself. something you didn't see when you were chasing her. You start realizing how much of your energy went into someone who never fully gave theirs back. How much time you spent thinking about what she wanted, what she needed, what she felt, while completely ignoring your own feelings. You start asking yourself questions you never asked before. Why was I okay with being second? Why was I always the one giving more? Why did I keep staying when the signs were obvious? And the honest answer isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's because you liked the idea of her more than the reality. Sometimes it's because you thought if you were patient enough, if you were good enough, eventually she'd realize what she had. But the hardest truth? Sometimes people already know exactly what they have. They just don't want it the same way you do. That realization used to make me angry. Not at her, at myself. Because once you see the pattern, you start wondering how many times you ignored your own instincts. There were signs, of course there were. Moments where she pulled away, moments where her effort didn't match yours, moments where you felt confused instead of secure. But every time those moments appeared, you explained them away. You told yourself she was just busy, just stressed, just going through something. You gave her the benefit of the doubt so many times that eventually you stopped questioning anything at all. And that's when you lost control of the situation, not because she manipulated you, but because you convinced yourself that waiting was the same thing as building something. Eventually though, life forces you to move forward, even if your heart isn't completely ready. Weeks pass, then months. You start focusing on other things, work, friends, your own goals, the parts of your life that existed before she showed up. And slowly, you start feeling like yourself again. Not the exact same person, but a version of you that's a little quieter, a little more cautious, a little harder to read. One day you notice something strange. You go a whole day without thinking about her, then 2, then a week. And when you finally do remember her, the feeling isn't the same, the pain isn't sharp anymore. It's dull, distant, like a memory instead of a wound. That's when you realize something important. You didn't just lose her. You learned something from her. You learned what it feels like to give your heart fully. You learned what it feels like when that heart isn't returned. And most importantly, you learned what it feels like to survive that. Because at one point, and you thought that pain would break you, that it would stay forever, that you'd never stop asking the same question. But eventually, that question starts changing. It stops being, why doesn't she love me? And starts becoming something else. Something quieter, something more honest. Why did I believe someone who never chose me was meant for me? You know what's strange? For the longest time, the question stayed the same. Why doesn't she love me? It sat in the back of your mind like a locked door you couldn't open. You replayed every conversation, every moment, every small detail, trying to find the exact second where something went wrong. Maybe if you had said something different. Maybe if you had waited longer. Maybe if you had been more patient, more confident, more interesting, more enough. That's the dangerous part about unreturned love. It convinces you that the problem must be you. Because if the problem is you, then at least it means you could have fixed it. But the truth is something most people don't realize until much later. Love isn't a test you pass by trying harder. It's not a reward you earn by being patient. It's not something you convince someone to feel. Real love happens naturally. 2 people choosing each other, not one person chasing while the other hesitates. Not one person waiting while the other decides, choosing freely every day. And once you understand that, something inside you shifts. You stop looking back at the situation as a failure. You start seeing it as clarity. Because if someone doesn't love you, it doesn't mean you were unlovable. It just means you were loving the wrong person. That realization takes time to accept. At first, it almost feels unfair because you gave so much. Your time, your attention, your loyalty, your patience. And in the end, you didn't get the ending you hoped for, but something else happened instead. You changed. You became more aware, more protective of your energy. You started noticing the difference between interest and convenience, between effort and empty words, between someone who enjoys your attention and someone who genuinely values your presence. That kind of awareness doesn't come from easy love. It comes from heartbreak. And one day, without even realizing it, you stop thinking about her in the same way. You remember the story, but you don't feel trapped in it anymore. she becomes part of your past, not the center of your future. And when you think back to the question that once consumed you, why doesn't she love me? You finally understand something. It was never the right question. The real question was never about her feelings. It was about your worth. And the moment you stop measuring your value through someone else's love, that question disappears completely. Because the truth is simple. Someone out there will meet you, and they won't hesitate. They won't need time to figure it out. They won't treat you like an option. They'll see you, they'll choose you, and they'll make that choice obvious. When that day comes, you won't be asking why someone doesn't love you anymore. You'll finally understand that the right person never makes you question it in the first place. I want to be clear about something up front. This isn't a sad story, or it is, in parts, but it's not the kind where I'm sitting in a dim room telling you about all the ways love failed me and how I gave up. That's not what this is. That's not why I'm here. I am here because I made a choice, an actual, deliberate, eyes-open choice, and I think that choice is one of the more honest things I've ever done for myself. And I also think most people won't understand it until they've been where I've been. So let me try to explain it. The first thing you need to know is that I wasn't always like this. There was a version of me, not that long ago honestly, who was completely all in on the whole thing. The relationship, the partnership, the building a life with someone project. I believed in it. Not in a naive way, not in a Disney movie way, but in the way a person believes in something they've thought seriously about and decided is worth pursuing. I wanted the person who knew my coffee order without asking. I wanted someone to text when something small but funny happened. I wanted the Sunday mornings and the inside jokes and the specific kind of comfort that only comes from being truly known by another person over time. I wanted all of it, genuinely, for years, and I went looking for it, over and over again with real effort, real openness, real willingness to be vulnerable and present, and all the things the books and the podcasts tell you to be, and I kept coming back empty. Not devastated, just empty. Like I'd gone to the well expecting water and found it dry again, and had to walk back the same long road carrying nothing. After enough trips, I stopped going to the well. That's not giving up, that's pattern recognition. Here's what the pattern looked like, because I think this part matters. Every relationship I was in, or almost in, or orbiting around, had the same shape to it. Not the same people, not the same details, but the same underlying geometry. I would show up fully. That was just how I did it. I don't know how to be half in something. Never learned. When I was there, I was completely there, present, invested, paying attention, caring about the small stuff, because the small stuff is where people actually live, and for a while that energy would get matched. The beginning always felt mutual. There was something real there. I wasn't imagining it. The connection was genuine, the warmth was genuine, the feeling that this might actually be the thing was genuine. And then, slowly, something would shift. Not a dramatic shift, not a fight or a betrayal or a definitive turning point, just a gradual, almost imperceptible drift toward a symmetry, where I was still all the way in, and they had quietly moved to something closer to halfway. And I would notice it and not say anything because I didn't want to be the person who was keeping score. And I would adjust my expectations down a little, and I would fill in the gaps with generous interpretations, and I would keep going until I couldn't, and then it would end. Either because I finally said something, or they finally left, or it just quietly died from the weight of its own imbalance, and I would be the one sitting with the full grief of it while they seemed, from the outside, at least, more or less fine. That happened enough times that I had to ask myself a serious question. Is this bad luck? Or is this me? And the answer, the honest one, the one I had to sit with for a long time before I could say it clearly, was both. Some of it was bad luck. Some of it was timing, incompatibility, the simple fact that most relationships don't work out, and that's not a reflection of anyone's worth. But some of it was me, specifically a version of me that I had been dragging into every relationship without fully examining it. I was choosing people who needed to be convinced, not in a dramatic way, not people who were cruel or checked out completely, but people who were, at their core, slightly ambivalent. People who were kind of available, sort of interested, generally positive, but never quite fully choosing me. People for whom I was a good option, but not the obvious one. And I kept choosing them because I confused the work of convincing someone with the feeling of earning something. Like if I had to work for it, it must be worth something. Like if it came easily, it probably wasn't real. That's a broken piece of logic, and I ran it for years. The love I was chasing was the love that felt like proof. Proof that I was worth the effort. Proof that someone who wasn't sure could become sure. Because of me. Because of what I brought. Because of who I was when I was fully present. What I actually found every time was people who remained a little unsure, and me, exhausted from the convincing, wondering why it still felt like I was auditioning. You cannot love someone into certainty. I know that now. Certainty about a person is something you either have or you don't. It's not something that gets built through accumulated evidence. But I didn't know it then. I kept trying to build it, and I kept being surprised when the foundation didn't hold. So I stopped. Not dramatically, no announcement, no declaration. I just stopped putting myself in situations that I already knew the shape of. Stopped swiping. Stopped accepting the half invitations from people who were interested in theory, but not in practice. Stopped extending myself toward things I could already tell weren't going to hold. And the first thing I noticed was how much energy I got back. That sounds almost embarrassingly simple, but it's real. The amount of mental and emotional bandwidth that I had been pouring into other people, into decoding their behavior, into managing my own hope, into the constant quiet work of being in something that wasn't quite working. That bandwidth suddenly had nowhere to go, and it came back to me. It's the strangest feeling. Suddenly having access to your own full attention. Suddenly being the primary recipient of your own care. I'd been so focused outward for so long that being focused inward felt almost disorienting at first. Like, what do I actually like? Not what do I like doing with someone else? What do I like alone, for no reason except that it's good for me? I had to relearn that, which is a little embarrassing to admit, but it's true. I want to be careful here, because I think there's a version of this story that slides into something self-congratulatory. Like, I chose myself, I learned to love being alone, now everything is better and I don't need anyone. That's not what I'm saying. That version is a little too clean, and I don't trust it. The truth is, being alone is hard in ways that being in a bad relationship is not. Being in a bad relationship is its own kind of hard. The grief of it, the confusion of it, the way it chips at you, I'm not romanticizing that. But there's a version of the suffering in a relationship that at least has company. You're not okay, but you're not okay with someone. There's another person in the room. Being alone means being not okay by yourself. It means the hard nights are genuinely quiet. It means there's no one to reach for when you wake up and the world feels like too much. It means birthdays and holidays and Sunday afternoons that can feel very wide and very empty if you let them. I feel that. I'm not pretending I don't, but here's the difference. When I was in those half relationships, those asymmetrical things, I felt alone anyway. I felt alone while texting someone. I felt alone at dinner with someone. I felt alone in the middle of a conversation with someone who was technically present but not really there. I felt alone in the specific, suffocating way that only happens when you're with another person who isn't meeting you. That kind of alone is worse than the real kind, because the real kind is honest. It doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. It doesn't make you question yourself. It doesn't ask you to keep pouring into it while it gives you just enough warmth to stay. Alone is just quiet. And quiet I can work with. There's something that started happening after a few months of this that I didn't expect. I started liking myself more. Not in a self-help affirmation way, in a specific practical way. I started noticing things about myself that I genuinely liked, qualities that had always been there, but that I'd been spending so much energy managing in the context of other people that I hadn't fully felt them. My ability to sit with hard things without needing to immediately fix them. The way I think about problems, the strange, specific humor that only really comes out when I'm comfortable, the things I care about that I used to soften or shrink because I wasn't sure they'd land with whoever I was trying to impress. Those things don't need to be approved of when there's no one to approve them. They just are. They're just mine. And I realized, and this is the part that hit me harder than I expected, I realized that for years I had been trying to get other people to validate things about me that I hadn't validated for myself yet. I was looking for them to confirm that I was worth loving before I'd really decided that for myself. That's not a thing another person can do for you. I see that clearly now. You can be loved by a dozen people, and still feel worthless if you haven't done the internal work. Love from the outside doesn't fill the inside. It just temporarily covers the gap. I had to do that work, and I could not do it while I was constantly looking outward. Let me tell you about a specific night that I think about sometimes. It was a Saturday, about 4 months into doing this thing deliberately. And I had nothing going on, no plans, no one to meet, no one to check in with, just a whole evening by myself. A few months earlier, that would have felt like failure, like evidence of something wrong with my life. I would have spent half of it anxious, texting people, trying to manufacture some company, telling myself I was fine while quietly being not fine at all. That night I made dinner, took longer than I needed to, listened to music I liked at a volume I liked, ate at my own table in my own time without checking my phone, watched something I'd been meaning to watch for a long time, went to bed when I was actually tired, not because there was nothing else to do, and somewhere in the middle of all of that I realized I was happy. Not in an event way, not because something good had happened, just quietly, steadily happy, content actually, in a way that didn't require anything from anyone. That felt new, that felt important, because I think for most of my adult life I had been treating happiness as a thing that required ingredients, people, plans, someone to share it with. And that night I discovered it could just be a state, a default, something you could arrive at by removing the things that were disrupting it rather than adding more things to try to create it. That was the night I really understood why I'd chosen this. I want to address the thing people say, because there are a few responses you get when you tell someone you're choosing to be alone, and most of them are well-meaning but not quite right. The first one is, you'll change your mind when you meet the right person. Maybe. I'm not ruling it out. I'm not taking a vow. But this statement assumes that the choice to be alone is a temporary state of waiting, like I'm just in a holding pattern until the right flight comes in. And that framing misses the whole point. I'm not waiting. I'm here. I'm actually fully here, in this life, right now. Not as a placeholder until something better comes along. The second one is you're scared of getting hurt. And look, yes, obviously, I'm a person. I've been hurt, and getting hurt is part of the record. But choosing to be alone isn't the same as choosing to be closed. I'm not building walls, I'm building a self that is solid enough that the next time I open up to someone, I'm doing it from a place of wholeness instead of a place of need. There's a difference between protecting yourself out of fear and protecting yourself out of self-respect. One closes everything down and the other just raises the standard. The third one, and this is the one that's hardest to explain, is, but don't you get lonely? Yes, sometimes, of course. But loneliness that comes from being alone is clean, it's honest. It points at a real thing, a real gap, a real human need. And I can sit with it, name it, feel it, and let it pass. That's survivable. That's just being human. The loneliness that comes from being in the wrong relationship and from being with someone and still feeling unseen, unchosen, like a guest in something that should feel like home, that loneliness has no clean edge. You can't point to it. You can't name it without sounding ungrateful. You can't let it pass because the source of it is still right there next to you. And every day you're in it, you're just adding more distance between yourself and the life you actually want. I'll take the honest loneliness every time. I've been thinking lately about what I actually want. Not as a performance of self-awareness, like the real list, the one I'd only tell myself. I want to feel chosen, really chosen. Not tolerated, not convenient, not the best available option for someone who's still looking over their shoulder. Chosen. The way you choose something when you've thought about it clearly and you still want it. The way you choose something and then keep choosing it on the days when it's difficult. I want someone who wants to know me. Not the surface, not the job and the opinions and the easy conversation. The actual me. The specific, sometimes difficult, definitely imperfect actual person. I want it to feel mutual. I want to stop being the one who loves more, works more, stays more. I want to be in something that meets me somewhere in the middle and stays there. And I decided, and this is the core of all of this, I decided that I would rather wait for that thing than keep settling for the shapes of it. I would rather be here in my own life, fully present and genuinely okay, than be in something halfway good that slowly costs me myself. That's not lowering my expectations. It's raising them. It's saying it's this specific thing, this particular experience of being really seen and really chosen and really met. That's what I'm holding out for. Not perfection, not the absence of difficulty, just mutuality, just real. And until that's available, I'm here, I'm fine here, I'm more than fine. So that's why I chose to be alone, not because love failed me, though it did sometimes, not because I stopped believing in it, because I didn't, not because I'm scared, though fear is part of everything, because I finally got honest about what I was actually doing when I kept showing up for things that weren't working. I was filling a space, managing a loneliness, keeping myself busy with the project of someone else so I didn't have to sit with the quieter, harder project of myself. And the quieter, harder project turned out to be the important one. I know who I am now in a way I didn't before. I know what I need, I know what I'm willing to give and what I'm not willing to keep giving to things that take it without returning it. I know the difference between loving someone and needing them to make me feel like I'm okay. That knowledge didn't come from a relationship, it came from the absence of one. From enough quiet to actually hear myself. And when the right person comes, if they come, when they come, I'll be someone worth finding. Not someone still figuring out what they want. Not someone so hungry for connection that they'll take any version of it. Someone whole. Someone who wants it but doesn't need it to survive. Someone who chose themselves first and is now maybe ready to choose someone else. That's the version of this I want. That's what I've been building toward. And it started with choosing to be alone. Will I ever be loved? There's a question some people carry around that they never really say out loud. It doesn't come up in conversations. It's not something you ask your friends. And it's definitely not something you post online. But it sits quietly in the back of your mind. The question is simple. Will I ever be loved? Not liked. Not tolerated. Not someone people talk to when they're bored. Loved. The kind of love where someone chooses you. The kind where they stay. Because if you're being honest with yourself, you've probably watched it happen for everyone else. You see couples walking together, friends getting engaged, people talking about their person like they're the most natural thing in the world. And part of you is happy for them. But another part of you can't help wondering, why has that never happened to me? You've tried before. You've talked to people. You've opened up. You've let yourself believe that maybe this time it could be different. And for a moment, it always feels promising. They laugh at your jokes. They text you first. They tell you they enjoy talking to you. And you start to think maybe this is finally it. Maybe this is the person who's going to stay. But then something always changes. The messages get shorter. The effort starts fading. The energy you once felt from them slowly disappears. Till one day you realize something that hurts more than anything. You cared way more than they did. And after that happens enough times, you stop asking what went wrong with the relationship. You start asking what's wrong with you. You look in the mirror and start picking yourself apart. Maybe I'm not attractive enough. Maybe I'm too quiet. Maybe I'm too emotional. Maybe I'm just not the type of person someone chooses. And the worst part about that feeling is that nobody around you sees it. To everyone else, you seem normal. You go to work. You talk to people. You laugh when you're supposed to. But inside, there's this quiet loneliness that never really leaves. Because wanting to be loved isn't some dramatic fantasy. It's one of the most human things there is. To have someone who looks at you and thinks, I want this person in my life. Not temporarily, not when it's convenient, but for real. And when you've spent years feeling like that hasn't happened for you yet, that's when the doubt starts creeping in. You start wondering if maybe some people are just meant to watch love happen for everyone else and never experience it themselves. After a while, the question doesn't just stay in the back of your mind. It starts showing up everywhere. You'll be scrolling through your phone and see someone you went to school with, posting pictures with their partner, smiling, laughing, looking like they found something real. And you pause for a second, not because you're jealous in a hateful way, but because you can't help thinking, how did they figure it out? How did they find someone who chose them? Because from where you're standing, it almost feels like everyone else received instructions for love that you never got. Some people fall into relationships so easily, they meet someone, they click, and suddenly they're building a life together. Meanwhile, you're still sitting there wondering why every connection you try seems to fade before it ever becomes something real. You replay old conversations in your head, moments where you thought things were going well, the way they used to respond quickly, the way they seemed interested in you, the way they said things that made you believe they actually cared, and then you remember the shift, That slow change where their energy started pulling away. The delayed replies, the canceled plans, the feeling that you were the only one trying to keep things alive. Until eventually, you stopped hearing from them altogether. And what hurts the most about those moments isn't just losing the person. It's realizing how easily they walked away. Like the connection that meant so much to you, it didn't really mean that much to them. That's the part that sticks with you. Because after enough of those experiences, something inside you starts changing. You become more cautious. You hesitate before getting excited about someone new. You stop letting yourself believe things too quickly. Not because you don't want love, but because disappointment starts feeling predictable. And eventually you find yourself doing something you never used to do before. You start preparing for people to leave. Even when someone new enters your life and things feel good, there's this quiet voice in the back of your mind saying, don't get too attached. It probably won't last. So instead of enjoying the moment, you hold part of yourself back. You protect your feelings. You stay guarded. And the strange thing about that kind of loneliness is that it doesn't always happen when you're physically alone. You can be surrounded by people, talking, laughing, living your life. But deep down, there's still this quiet uncertainty, because the question never really disappears. Late at night, when everything gets quiet, it comes back again. Will someone ever truly love me? Not temporarily, not out of convenience, but the kind of love where someone looks at you and decides you're worth staying for. And when you've spent years feeling like you're still waiting for that moment, it's hard not to start wondering if maybe it was never meant for you at all. The hardest part about carrying that question, will I ever be loved, is that eventually it stops sounding like a question. It starts sounding like an answer. After enough disappointments, enough people leaving, enough almost relationships that never become real, something inside you slowly shifts. You stop expecting love, not dramatically, not in some big moment where you say you're done with relationships forever. It's quieter than that. You just stop hoping the same way you used to. When you meet someone new, you don't let yourself imagine a future with them anymore. You don't let your mind wander into those what-if scenarios, because every time you did that in the past, it eventually ended the same way they left. So now you protect yourself. You convince yourself that you don't really need love like other people do. You focus on work, on hobbies, on building a life that doesn't rely on anyone staying. And on the outside, it actually starts to look like you're doing better. You're more independent. You don't chase people anymore. You don't beg for attention. You don't sit around waiting for someone to text you back. But what most people don't see is the quiet sadness that comes with that kind of independence. Because deep down, you never actually stop wanting love. You just stop believing it would happen. There's a difference, and that difference shows up in the smallest moments. Like when you're walking somewhere alone and you see a couple holding hands, or when your friends start talking about their relationships and the little things their partner does for them, or when you're lying in bed at night and the room is completely silent. That's when the thought slips back in again. What if it never happens for me? What if I'm one of those people who's always the friend, always the listener, always the one who's there for everyone else, but never the person someone chooses? Because when you've spent enough time feeling overlooked, it starts changing the way you see yourself. You begin assuming that if someone better walks into their life, they'll choose them instead of you. That if someone more exciting shows up, you'll be forgotten. So you keep your expectations low. You tell yourself you're fine on your own. But the truth is, there's still a small part of you that wonders what it would feel like to have someone who doesn't hesitate, someone who doesn't disappear when things get complicated, someone who looks at you and doesn't need time to decide. They just know, and maybe the scariest part of all is realizing how badly you still want that, even after everything, even after the doubt, even after convincing yourself you don't need it. That small part of you still hopes that one day someone will walk into your life and prove that all those fears were wrong. But here's something most people don't realize when they ask that question. Will I ever be loved? The problem isn't that you're unlovable. The problem is that when you've been hurt enough times, you start measuring your worth by the people who didn't stay. You start using their choices as proof that you weren't enough, proof that you were easy to leave, proof that maybe love just isn't something meant for you. But those people were never the judges of your value. They were just people who passed through your life. And sometimes people leave not because you lacked something, but because they were never meant to stay long enough to see everything you are. The truth is, love doesn't happen on a schedule. Some people find it early. They meet someone at 18, 20, 22. and it feels like their life's just clicked into place. But for a lot of people, it takes longer. Not because they're less worthy, but because the kind of love they're meant to have requires the right person. And the right person isn't someone who hesitates about you. It's not someone who keeps you guessing. It's not someone who makes you question whether you matter. The right person doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just by wanting to be chosen. They make it clear, effortlessly. And when that kind of love finally shows up, it doesn't feel like chasing. It doesn't feel like proving yourself. It doesn't feel like begging someone to stay. It feels calm, like something that was always supposed to happen just at the right time. So if you've been sitting with that question for a long time, if you've spent nights wondering whether anyone will ever truly choose you, here's the truth you need to hear. The fact that the wrong people left your life doesn't mean the right person never will enter it. It just means your story hasn't reached that chapter yet. And one day, when someone finally walks into your life and stays without hesitation, you'll realize something that used to be impossible to believe. You were never unlovable. You were just waiting for someone who could actually see you. You're always the loser. There's a version of losing that nobody prepares you for. Not the kind where you fail a test or lose a job or get broken up with in a parking lot while your hazards are still on. That kind of losing is clean. It hurts, but it has a shape. You know what you lost. You know when it happened. You can point to the moment and say, that's the one. That's where it went wrong. The kind I'm talking about doesn't have a moment. It's the kind where you keep showing up, keep trying, keep being the bigger person, keep choosing the high road, and somehow, at the end of all of it, you're still the one sitting alone wondering where you went wrong. You did everything right, or at least you did more right than wrong, and you still lost. Not once, every time, and you start to wonder if that's just your thing, if losing is just something that happens to you specifically. I've been thinking about this for a while now, not in a wallowing way, more like there's something here I haven't named yet, and I need to name it before it keeps running my life. Because I think most of us who always end up losing in relationships, friendships, romantic stuff, family stuff, doesn't matter. We don't lose because we're bad at this. We lose because of something that looks like a strength from the outside, something that people compliment us for, something we were taught was the right way to be. We lose because we care more. And I know how that sounds. I know I care too much is the thing everyone says when they want to avoid accountability. Like, yeah, sure, buddy, you care too much. That's why you burned the whole thing down. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the person who cares so much they become controlling or jealous or obsessive. That's a different thing. I'm talking about the person who genuinely, quietly, consistently loves people harder than those people love them back, and keeps doing it, and can't stop, and doesn't know why. That person always loses. Not dramatically, just slowly, over and over again. Let me back up. I think it starts young. Not in some deep trauma way. I'm not trying to make this a therapy session, but I do think most of us learned early what role we were playing, and some of us learned that our role was to be the one who holds things together. Maybe you were the kid who noticed when mom was in a mood and adjusted accordingly. Maybe you were the one in your friend group who everyone came to when stuff was falling apart. But when your stuff was falling apart, you kind of just handled it yourself because it felt like too much to ask. Maybe you were the sibling who kept the peace, the partner who apologized first even when you weren't wrong, just because the silence was too heavy. You learned that love looked like management, like anticipation, like making yourself small enough that everyone else could be big. And here's the thing, and it worked. People liked you, people needed you, people said you were the glue, the rock, the steady one. Nobody asked if the glue was tired, so you kept going. You got good at it, really good. You got so good at reading rooms and adjusting and being whatever the situation needed that you kind of forgot to figure out what you needed. Or maybe you knew somewhere, but asking for it felt like breaking a rule you didn't write, but somehow agreed to. And that pattern, that beautiful, exhausting, self-erasing pattern, follows you into every relationship you ever have. Here's how it plays out in practice. You meet someone, it could be a friend, could be someone you're falling for, doesn't matter. You connect, it feels real. And from the jump, you're in it, you're present. You remember the details, you follow up on the thing they mentioned 2 weeks ago. You show up when you said you would. You notice when something's off and you say something. They like this about you. They tell you. You're different, they say. You actually listen, you actually care, and you feel it. That warmth of being seen, of being valued, of finally being in something that feels like it matches what you've been putting out for years. Except, slowly, quietly, you start to notice the math doesn't add up. You text first most of the time. You're the one who makes the plan. When something good happens to you, you tell them, and they respond warmly but briefly and then pivot to themselves. And when something good happens to them, you ask follow-up questions. You want to know everything. You're genuinely excited for them. They don't do that for you. Not in the same way, and you tell yourself it's fine. People show love differently. You can't expect everyone to be exactly like you. That would be unfair. That would be projecting. So you keep going. But then something hard happens to you, something real, and you reach out and they're supportive, but it feels surface level, like they're being a good person in the way you are a good person to a coworker you don't know that well. Polite, present, but not in it with you. And you know the difference. You know what it feels like when someone is actually in it with you because you've been in it with them. You know what it feels like to sit with someone in their hard thing. You've done it. You're good at it. They're not doing that. They're being kind, but they're not in it with you. And here's the moment. Here's the fork in the road that most of us don't even know we're standing at. You could say something. You could name it. You could say, hey, I feel like I'm carrying more of this than you are, and I need that to change. But you don't, because that feels like an accusation. Because you don't want to be the person who keeps score. Because what if you're wrong? What if you're being too sensitive? What if bringing it up ruins the whole thing and then you lose them anyway and it's your fault? So you say nothing, and you adjust your expectations down a little, and you keep going. And 6 months later, you're half the person you were when you started this, and they're exactly the same, and you're exhausted, and you don't even know why. That's the loss. That's the one that doesn't have a moment. I want to talk about the hope problem, because I think hope is actually the engine of all of this. Not hope in the inspirational poster sense. I mean hope in the very specific, very quiet sense of, I think if I keep being this way, eventually it'll come back to me. You believe somewhere underneath everything that love is a long game, that consistency gets rewarded, that if you keep showing up and being real and caring deeply enough, one day the person on the other end of it will match you, will finally see what you've been putting out and rise to meet it. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes people do wake up. Sometimes the thing you've been patient for actually blooms, but a lot of the time, and I think most of us know this but don't want to say it, a lot of the time, the hope is just delay. It's a way of not having to grieve something that's clearly already gone. Because as long as you're hoping, you don't have to admit that the version of this you wanted was never actually available. That's brutal to accept. That someone you love genuinely, deeply, for real, that someone might just not be built to love you back the way you need. Not because they're bad, not because you did anything wrong, just because they're different. They're wired different. They're at a different place. They need different things. You can love someone and still be wrong for each other. You can care about someone and still be the wrong shape for the hole they're trying to fill. That is a complete sentence. That is the whole truth. There's no fix at the end of it. And when you're the person who loves more, when you're always the one who's more in it, more invested, more hopeful, that truth hits different. Because it means all that extra love you were putting out wasn't the solution. It was just yours. It lived in you. It didn't change anything. That's the part that makes you feel like a loser. But here's where I want to sit for a second, because I've been turning this over for a while, and I think there's something we get wrong about what losing actually means. We treat losing like it's about outcome. You win if the relationship lasts. You lose if it ends. You win if they choose you. You lose if they don't. You win if you stop caring first. You lose if you still care when they've already moved on. By that math, yeah. If you're the one who cares more, you lose every time. You will always be the last one in and the last one out and the one who misses it the longest. But I'm not sure that's actually losing. I think what we call losing in love is often just feeling more. And feeling more is not the same as being worth less. It is not a character flaw. It is not a weakness. It is actually one of the rarest things a person can have. Most people spend their whole lives looking for someone who will love them with real depth, real presence, someone who actually listens, who actually shows up, who actually stays. And you who always ends up on the losing side of this, you are that person. You are the thing other people are searching for. The problem isn't that you care too much. The problem is that you keep handing that to people who can't hold it. And I know that sounds like I'm just reframing the same loss as a gift, which is a little bit of a cope. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You can call it beautiful all you want, but it still hurts to be in a mostly empty thing when you wanted something full. But I do think there's a real difference between I keep losing because something is wrong with me, and I keep losing because I keep choosing people who can't match what I'm bringing. One of those is a sentence about your worth. The other is a sentence about your pattern. And patterns can change. Worth can't, because it was never the issue. Let me talk about the aftermath for a second, because I think that's where the real damage lives. When you've been the one who cared more enough times, something shifts in you. You start to get suspicious of your own feelings. You fall for someone and there's this voice in the back of your head, quiet but consistent, that says, I don't. You know how this goes, you know where you end up. So you hedge, you hold back a little, you don't text as much as you want to. You don't say the thing you're feeling right away. You play it cooler than you are because you've learned somewhere in your body that the full version of you is too much. And then, and this is the part that's really something, you end up in relationships where you're actually not fully present, where you're performing a version of yourself that's been dialed back. And those relationships don't work either, because you're not actually in them. And you lose those too. So now you're losing when you care too much and losing when you try to care less. There's no version of this that's working, and the voice in the back of your head gets louder. See? You told you. You're just bad at this. You always lose, but you're not bad at it. You're just protecting yourself with a tool that's hurting you. The hedging, the holding back, the performance of indifference, that's not protection. That's just a different kind of losing. Slower, quieter, but still losing. Because you end up alone anyway. Except this time you're also not yourself. I think the thing that actually needs to change, team, and I'm saying this as much to myself as anyone, is not the caring. Don't stop caring. Please don't let the world do that to you. The thing that needs to change is the selection, where you're putting it. Because if you're honest, really honest, you probably knew early. You probably saw the signs, the texts, that were always a little shorter than yours, the way they talked about their ex with a little too much energy, going either direction, the way they went quiet when you needed them to go loud, the way the effort was always a little asymmetrical. You saw it, and you talked yourself out of it, because they had so many other good things, and who are you to expect everything? And maybe you're asking for too much, and maybe you just need to give it time. Time doesn't fix asymmetry. Time just shows you what was always true. You have to get better at believing people when they show you who they are early, not cynically, not with your walls up from the jump, but with your eyes open, with the part of you that actually knows what it needs allowed to speak, without being immediately overruled by the part of you that just wants it to work. The right person is not going to require you to shrink yourself to make the relationship function. The right person is not going to make you wonder consistently where you stand. The right person is not going to be a project you're optimistic about. They're going to be someone who makes the asymmetry hard to find because they're actually trying. That person exists. I genuinely believe that. And I think the reason a lot of us haven't found them yet is not because we're unlovable or broken or too much. It's because we keep confusing potential with reality. We keep loving the idea of someone at the expense of the truth of them. So here's where I land on this. You're always the loser. Yeah, in a specific, limited, outcome-based reading of the word. Sure, you care more, you hurt more, you stay longer, you miss it harder when it's gone. But you're not losing at the thing that actually matters. You're not losing your capacity to feel. You're not losing your ability to be present for someone. You're not losing your willingness to be vulnerable even after it's burned you, even though it probably should have made you colder by now, but it didn't. That's not a bug. That is, genuinely, without irony, the whole thing. That's the part of a person that makes love feel like love instead of just convenience. You've been calling it a weakness your whole life because it's kept costing you. But it was never the problem. It was always the best thing about you. The world just kept putting it in front of the wrong people. That's a solvable thing. It's a slow, uncomfortable, sometimes heartbreaking thing to solve. But it's solvable. You're not cursed. You're not broken. You're not destined to always be on the losing side of this. You just need to stop handing your rarest quality to people who don't know what to do with it and start giving it to someone who already knows what they have.